All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really visceral, high-stakes what-if scenario that reimagines the United States completely stripped of its most foundational document. I mean, think about the reality we live in today, right? We're united from coast to coast under a single overarching legal umbrella. Now, I want you to imagine waking up tomorrow and finding out that unifying framework is just gone.
So what if the U.S. had no constitution? Picture this. You're packing up your car to take a road trip. Maybe you're traveling from Pennsylvania down to Virginia to visit some family. Today, you don't even think about it. That's just a seamless drive down the highway. But in a world without the Constitution, crossing that modern state border wouldn't be a simple drive at all. It would be like stepping into a fractured, balkanized reality. You'd essentially be entering a rival republic. We're talking a totally different currency, downright hostile trade laws, and, most alarmingly, a completely different set of civil rights.
Okay, let's dive into this. Part 1, A League of Friendship.
Now, the truth is, this divided nightmare isn't just some dystopian fantasy. It's almost exactly what the country looked like right after the Revolutionary War. You see, before the Constitution, our predecessor government was established by the Articles of Confederation, and this system definitely did not create a unified nation. Instead, it just set up this so-called firm league of friendship, where the central government was intentionally designed to be incredibly weak. Each state basically operated as its own sovereign, independent entity. Under this system, there was no president sitting in an executive branch to enforce the laws, and absolutely no Supreme Court to step in and resolve conflicts between these newly independent states.
9. That is the magic number here. The young nation was ruled by a unicameral Congress where each state had a single vote, completely regardless of its population size. So to pass any law, it required this paralyzing supermajority of 9 out of the 13 states. And let me tell you, getting 9 independent, fiercely competitive states to agree on anything was nearly impossible. It made legislative action incredibly difficult and super rare.
And honestly, it gets worse. 13, if you looked around, realized the system was totally broken, and wanted to amend the Articles of Confederation to fix it, you needed unanimous consent from all 13 states. Just one single state could veto a change that the other 12 desperately wanted. This impossible threshold effectively locked the national government in a state of permanent failure.
Part 2, The Interstate Economic Nightmare.
So let's shift our journey back to that traveler we talked about earlier. Simply trying to trade or move goods across state lines meant facing total financial chaos. On one hand, you had state-minted currencies. Because there was no strong central banking system, states were just minting their own highly inflated money. The currency you held in your pocket in Massachusetts might be practically worthless by the time you reached New York. And on the other hand, neighboring state tariffs waged brutal trade wars. States set up competing duties and border checks just to tax goods coming from right next door. If you were a merchant, this balkanized economy was literally strangling your business and making national economic growth totally impossible.
Hovering above all this chaos was a pretty stark reality. The central government had zero authority to levy taxes. None. Congress couldn't tax the citizens directly to fund the country. Instead, it was reduced to practically begging the states for money to pay off massive debts from the Revolutionary War. And because the states rarely actually paid up, the nation's credit was completely destroyed.
And this brilliantly illustrates Part 3, Defenseless and Divided.
You see, when your economy collapses, your defenses fall right along with it, leaving the infant nation highly vulnerable. Foreign powers absolutely wasted no time exploiting America's lack of a centralized military. Great Britain point-blank refused to vacate Western forts on American soil, knowing full well Congress had no standing army to evict them. Meanwhile, Spain closed the lower Mississippi River to American trade, effectively cutting off a vital economic artery. The United States could sign all the treaties it wanted on paper, but it couldn't back them up. Without a constitution and the unified defense it provided, foreign empires could have easily annexed or just salami-sliced away our frontier lands piece by piece. But hey, the threats weren't just external. Just follow the timeline of Daniel Shays' rebellion in Massachusetts from 1786 to 1787. Over several months, farmers facing heavy debts and foreclosures reached a boiling point. Within weeks, an uprising began, and angry mobs marched on the courts. Days later, they were actively attacking the Springfield Armory. And the end result? The federal government was completely powerless to intervene and help Massachusetts put down the rebellion. It showed everyone exactly how quickly domestic unrest and tax revolts could spiral toward an all-out civil war when there was no federal authority to maintain order.
So the crucial point is right here in Part 4, the patchwork of rights.
Because without a unified government, the entire social fabric just starts to tear. The Bill of Rights, it would not exist.
The first 10 amendments, the very text protecting your individual liberties against government overreach, would vanish entirely. That means absolutely no national guarantee of your most basic freedoms as an ordinary citizen.
Without a federal constitution, your civil liberties would literally depend on exactly where you were standing. It would be a chaotic patchwork of rights. Imagine this. In a New England republic, maybe your free speech is guaranteed, but a fair trial is heavily regulated by the state. Step across a border into the mid-Atlantic, and suddenly your speech is restricted, even if your property is safer. Travel down to the southern states, and your right to a fair trial might just be decided by local private militias. Ordinary citizens would be forced to gamble their liberties every single time they navigated this balkanized maze of state laws. You'd be facing massive regional disparities in how human beings were treated.
Just to summarize the sheer scale of the loss for everyday people in this fractured reality, there would be no universal free speech. There'd be no uniform standard for fair trials across borders. And your protections against government overreach would be left entirely to the whims of whatever state you happen to be standing in at that moment. The very concept of being an American with a standardized set of inherent rights simply wouldn't exist. You would be entirely at the mercy of local geography.
Which brings us to Part 5, Why the Constitution Matters.
Witnessing this impending chaos, the economic collapse, the looming foreign threats, the domestic rebellions, and of course, that terrifying lack of unified rights, leaders like George Washington and James Madison realized the young republic was going to collapse. A stronger federal government was urgently needed to prevent absolute anarchy. So they devised a new framework that provided structural solutions to finally unify the nation. Step 1, establish centralized federal authority and a reliable military to defend the borders and keep domestic peace. Step 2, give the federal government the power to regulate interstate commerce, stopping those bitter state-to-state trade wars and creating a unified national economy. And finally, Step 3, allow for the enshrinement of a universal Bill of Rights. This ensured that a baseline of individual liberties was protected universally no matter what state you lived in.
We've seen how dangerously close the United States came to fragmenting into a chaotic, balkanized cluster of vulnerable states, a place where your basic rights just vanished the moment you crossed a border. The Constitution stitched that fractured map together, but it leaves us with a really provocative question to think about. Are universal rights guaranteed forever, or are they just a signature away from balkanization? It's a pretty stark reminder of how fragile our unified legal framework really is, and how absolutely crucial it is to understand the history that holds it all together. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.